It was a day most in North America will remember the rest of their lives. And if it is etched in our memories, imagine what that day was like for those that were there. The RCMP officers who responded, the passengers on a bus stopped just outside of Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. Vince Lee, 40 at the time, and now known as Will Baker, was on his way to Winnipeg in 2008. Tim McLean was 22 and was also on his way east. He was a passenger on the same bus. He had spent the previous months working at carnivals in Western Canada and was returning home to Winnipeg. He sat at the back of the bus, and at Erickson, Manitoba, Lee boarded and eventually moved to the back, sitting next to Tim. Tim fell asleep on the ride, leaning up against the window of the bus with headphones over his ears. Not at all unusual for late-night bus rides. Seemingly out of nowhere, Lee then pulled out a large knife, and what happened next is the stuff of the most horrific horror movies. Tim was stabbed repeatedly in the neck and chest. The driver of the bus pulled over and evacuated the vehicle. The driver and two men who stayed on the bus tried to save Tim, but they were prevented by Lee, who was slashing at them. Lee would kill Tim, behead him, and begin to cannibalize him. It was too late for Tim, but a passenger, the driver, and a truck driver outside of the bus prevented Lee from escaping. The driver had to engage the emergency immobilization system on the bus because Lee tried to drive it away. When RCMP arrived, there was a short standoff. Passengers were taken from the scene to nearby Brandon, Manitoba to be interviewed and to be safe. Greyhound representatives took passengers to a local store to replace their clothes, which were left on the bus, and to arrange for all of them to get to Winnipeg. Lee would be tased, finally, handcuffed, and arrested. And while Lee remained in custody on December 21st, 2008, Tim's son would be born some 5 months after his father died. After a trial, Lee was found not criminally responsible by reason of mental insanity. In Canada, that means he would receive psychiatric treatment, and in Lee's case, that for 7 years, he was an inpatient in a mental health facility, Selkirk Mental Health Center. The cases of people found NCR are reviewed by a mental health board once a year for as long as the person lives or until they receive an absolute discharge. After 7 years, Lee was put on a conditional discharge that allowed him to leave the treatment hospital and move to a supervised living arrangement in Winnipeg, while being treated at the Health Sciences Center there. In 2016, he was allowed to move into independent living and still had conditions about his treatment. Over the course of those years, the review board felt that Lee's schizophrenia was being treated, that he was under control, and that his risk had lowered enough that he could live outside a hospital setting with a treatment plan. He was transitioning to an absolute discharge, when the state would no longer manage his illness for him, but he would be expected to successfully manage his mental health and therefore his risk on his own. The Supreme Court of Canada has made it clear that the boards have to grant absolute discharges when it's found that the person no longer poses a significant safety threat. When he did the terrible things that he did, Lee had untreated schizophrenia. He had begun to hear God talking to him. He believed that he was the third story of the Bible, as he put it, the second coming of Jesus, and destined to save the population from an alien invasion. When he did the terrible things he did and was found NCR by a court, it caused a great deal of controversy. Understandably, Tim's family wanted Lee to spend the rest of his life in jail, and they had a lot of public support on that stand. Others pointed to gaps and failures in Canada's mental health system, including the lack of funding and lack of teeth for intervening in concerning cases. Still others supported the NCR system, which treats rather than punishes those who are so mentally ill that they can't appreciate the nature of their actions, cannot tell right from wrong in a given situation. Certainly, there is a lot to talk about here. It's very difficult for most to accept that Vince Lee would be discharged. That, after what he did on that bus and the aftermath of his actions, he would be free in the community. From anger to fear to disagreement, all of that is understandable. And yet, recovery and rehabilitation is a real possibility for people with the most serious mental health issues. The NCR system in Canada, imperfect as it is, tries to establish a balance between public safety and treatment and recovery for those who are so seriously mentally ill that they are not criminally responsible. When Lee received an absolute discharge in February 2017 and has not come into conflict with the law since. It has been 6 years, nearly as long as he spent at Selkirk, and recidivism statistics tell us that we will probably never hear about Vince Lee, or Will Baker as he's known now, breaking any criminal law again. As a prosecutor, I worked in this area of the law for a long time, and the recidivism statistics were accurate in the regions where I worked. Even in a caseload filled with schizophrenia and psychoses caused by other means. That is not to say that a relapse will not happen in Lee's case or in any other. It could, if he fails to access the resources that support his mental health. If he does so, he could become a risk again. That feels unfair to those affected by violence, and particularly by this type of random and brutal violence. What is also unfair in this horrific situation is the impact on those that bore witness to Tim's death. One of the responding officers, Corporal Ken Barker, had PTSD and ended his own life. He would not be the only person to suffer PTSD as a result of this gruesome event. The driver was heroic, getting the passengers off the bus to safety, preventing that bus from leaving, and preventing Lee from escaping. The truck driver, the other passenger as well, and the officers. In all that happened, there was a lot of care and support for those affected, but we know now that there should have been a debriefing and significant aftercare. Just as we should examine the care we provide after horrific events, we need to reckon with the inadequate resources in place for those suffering mental illness and needing treatment before the risk is out of control. It's a theme we will see time and time again in future videos dealing with cases of mentally ill individuals who collide with the law. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and want more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.